In 1683, the Ottoman Empire controlled roughly 2 million square miles across Europe, Asia, and Africa. One family had held its throne for nearly 4 centuries, and the Sultan claimed authority from Hungary to the holiest cities of Islam. Then the campaign against Vienna failed. 16 years later, the empire surrendered most of Hungary. In 1922, the throne itself was abolished. How did an empire of that scale unravel while its dynasty survived? In July of 1302, a force led by Osman defeated a Byzantine army on the plain of Baphius, not far from the Sea of Marmara. The Byzantine historian George Pacumiras recorded the encounter, making it the first event in Osman's career that can be placed securely in contemporary evidence. There was no imperial palace, no great capital, and no declaration that a 600-year empire had begun. Osman was still a frontier lord whose territory occupied only a small corner of northwestern Anatolia. That corner was unusually favorable to an ambitious leader. The once powerful Sultanate of Rum had been reduced by Mongol domination, leaving Muslim Anatolia divided among competing princes, tribal chiefs, governors, and military households. To the west, the Byzantine Empire still possessed fortified towns in Bithynia, the regions south and east of the Sea of Marmara. But imperial authority in the countryside was weakening. Constantinople faced financial strain, political rivalry, and threats on several frontiers. Between the fractured Muslim interior and the vulnerable Byzantine border, no single power could enforce lasting control. Osman was known as a beg, a title for a local ruler or commander. The conventional date for the foundation of his state is 1299, but surviving evidence does not reveal a single founding act in that year. There is no contemporary charter announcing independence and no reliable record of a coronation. Even Osman's birth year and the precise date of his death remain uncertain. What can be established is more modest and more revealing. Around 1300, a community of followers was beginning to identify its fortunes with his name. That community was not a modern nation, nor was it held together by ancestry alone. Turkoman pastoralists and mounted warriors formed an important part of it. Muslim fighters were drawn by frontier warfare, religious prestige, land, and the expectation of plunder. Yet the early Ottoman circle also absorbed converts, local Christians, and former Byzantine servants. Later traditions remembered Kosa Mihal as a Byzantine lord who joined Osman and accepted Islam. Whatever details were added afterward, broader evidence confirms that cooperation crossed religious and ethnic boundaries. Osman could fight one local ruler while reaching an agreement with another. This flexibility helps explain his growth. Baphius did more than remove a Byzantine field army. Victory increased Osman's reputation and made his household more attractive to men seeking protection and reward. His forces could raid roads, control farmland, isolate fortified settlements, and pressure towns without immediately mastering the techniques of imperial siege warfare. Each success brought livestock, revenue, land, and new followers. Those resources made the next campaign possible. Expansion became a cycle in which military achievement produced loyalty, and loyalty produced further military strength. The famous stories about Osman's ancestry and destiny must be treated differently. Ottoman chronicles written generations later connected him to Ertugrul, Sheikh Edebali, and a prophetic dream that promised rule to his descendants. These accounts became central to dynastic memory, but they were not recorded by witnesses at the beginning of Osman's career. They reveal how a later empire wished to explain its origins. The dynasty had been chosen, blessed, and destined to grow. They cannot prove that Osman himself began with such a vision. The evidence instead shows a leader responding effectively to opportunities that neither he nor his rivals could have fully predicted. When Osman died, probably in the 1320s, his son Orhan inherited more than a band of raiders. In 1326, Ottoman forces took Bursa after a prolonged campaign that had cut the city off from its surroundings. Bursa gave Orhan something his father had never possessed, a wealthy urban center that could serve as a capital. Markets, religious foundations, workshops, and tax revenue supported a more settled government. Orhan appointed commanders and judges, sponsored buildings, and issued silver coins in his own name. Coinage was both practical money and a public declaration that the son of Osman now ruled by his own authority. The conquest of Nicaea in 1331 and Nicomedia in 1337 consolidated Ottoman control over much of Bithynia. Yet Orhan did not expand by warfare alone. He entered Byzantine dynastic politics and married Theodora, a daughter of Emperor John VI Kantakouzenos. Ottoman soldiers crossed into Europe as allies during a Byzantine civil war. In 1352, they gained a foothold at Simpe on the Gallipoli Peninsula. 2 years later, an earthquake damaged fortifications around Gallipoli, and forces led by Orhan's son Suleiman occupied the strategic area. The natural disaster opened the walls, but Ottoman involvement in Europe had already begun through alliance and civil conflict. By Orhan's death in 1362, the family commanded cities in Anatolia and a bridgehead in Europe. Its rise had not followed a written plan for global conquest. It had depended on geography, military reputation, mixed alliances, urban resources, and the ability to turn one man's followers into his son's subjects. Osman left behind a name powerful enough to legitimize rule, but not a settled law of succession. As his descendants moved deeper into Europe and Anatolia, every prince capable of attracting soldiers could expand the dynasty or divide it. On July 20, 1402, the army of Timur defeated Sultan Bayezid I outside Ankara. Bayezid had spent 13 years expanding Ottoman power with extraordinary speed. By evening, much of that achievement had broken apart. His army was scattered, he was taken prisoner, and several Anatolian territories he had absorbed were restored to their former rulers. Barely a century after Osman entered the historical record, the dynasty that carried his name appeared close to losing everything. The disaster had grown from success. Under Murad I, the Ottomans turned their foothold at Gallipoli into a durable European domain. Edirne became their center in Thrace, allowing armies to move deeper into the Balkans. Murad combined conquest with accommodation. Some fortresses received Ottoman garrisons. Some rulers paid tribute, furnished soldiers, or accepted vassal status. Christian nobles could retain land and authority if they served the expanding dynasty. This expansion carried Murad into conflict with Serbian and Bosnian forces at Kosovo in 1389. The battle ended with heavy losses on both sides. Prince Lazar of Serbia was killed, and Murad became the only Ottoman sultan known to have died on a battlefield. His son Bayezid emerged as ruler before the army dispersed. Bayezid's brother Yaqub was killed during the succession, apparently on the new sultan's orders. The episode exposed a principle that would shape Ottoman politics for generations. The throne did not automatically pass to the eldest son. Any capable male prince could become a rival center of loyalty. Bayezid moved quickly enough to earn the name Thunderbolt. In Europe, he tightened control over Balkan vassals and defeated a large crusading army at Nicopolis in 1396. In Anatolia, he absorbed neighboring Turkish principalities and brought their soldiers, towns, and revenues under his command. He also applied sustained pressure to Constantinople. But the displaced Anatolian rulers wanted their lands returned, and they found a powerful champion in Timur. Timur's empire stretched from Central Asia into Iran and Mesopotamia. Bayezid and Timur competed for influence over eastern Anatolia, exchanged demands, and received refugees from one another's enemies. Their confrontation was not a simple struggle between Europe and Asia. Bayezid's army included Serbian Christian troops and contingents from recently conquered Muslim principalities. Timur's allies included former rulers who understood that an Ottoman defeat might restore their positions. At Ankara, exhaustion, divided loyalties, and Timur's tactical advantage worked against Bayezid. Some Anatolian contingents abandoned him for their former lords. Serbian troops continued to resist, but they could not reverse the battle. Bayezid died in captivity the following year. Later stories describe Timur displaying him in an iron cage, but surviving evidence does not establish that famous humiliation as fact. The confirmed result was serious enough. No undisputed sultan remained, and no rule required Bayezid's sons to accept one brother as sovereign. Suleiman established himself in the European provinces. Isa competed for Bursa. Mehmed held territory around Amasya in northern Anatolia, while Musa eventually built his own power in Europe. Each brother recruited commanders, collected revenue, negotiated with neighboring rulers, and presented himself as the legitimate heir. Outside powers changed sides because division allowed them to recover territory or restrain whichever prince seemed strongest. The struggle became a shifting war rather than a clean contest between two armies. Mehmed defeated Isa, then used Musa to weaken Suleiman. Musa defeated and killed Suleiman, but soon became Mehmed's enemy. In July of 1413, Mehmed, supported by Byzantine and Serbian forces, defeated Musa near Sofia. After approximately 11 years of civil war, he stood as Mehmed I, ruler of a reunited Ottoman state. The dynasty endured because its institutions had fractured without disappearing. Provincial commanders, judges, tax networks, frontier families, and vassals continued to function under competing princes. The brothers damaged the state, but they also kept Ottoman authority alive in separate regions. None of their neighbors produced another family able to command comparable loyalty across Anatolia and the Balkans. The name of Osman remained a political resource even when his descendants were killing one another. Mehmed I spent the rest of his reign restoring fortresses, relationships, and revenue. When Murad II succeeded him in 1421, rival princes again tested the throne. Murad defeated an uncle named Mustafa, and then a rebellion centered on his younger brother. After abdicating in favor of his young son Mehmed in 1444, he returned to defeat a crusading army at Varna. A Janissary revolt recalled him again in 1446, and his victory at Kosovo 2 years later restored Ottoman military authority in the Balkans. By Murad's death in 1451, the dynasty had recovered from capture, partition, civil war, and repeated rebellion. Its survival rested on military households and governing networks that remained attached to the House of Osman even when they disagreed over which prince should rule. But recovery carried a warning. As long as every prince could raise an army, the family that gave the empire continuity could also tear it apart. Murad's successor would answer that danger with a stronger capital, deeper centralization, and a far more ruthless understanding of dynastic survival. On July 20, 1402, the army of Timur defeated Sultan Bayezid I outside Ankara. Bayezid had spent 13 years expanding Ottoman power with extraordinary speed. By evening, much of that achievement had broken apart. His army was scattered, he was taken prisoner, and several Anatolian territories he had absorbed were restored to their former rulers. Barely a century after Osman entered the historical record, the dynasty that carried his name appeared close to losing everything. The disaster had grown from success. Under Murad I, the Ottomans turned their foothold at Gallipoli into a durable European domain. Edirne became their center in Thrace, allowing armies to move deeper into the Balkans. Murad combined conquest with accommodation. Some fortresses received Ottoman garrisons. Some rulers paid tribute, furnished soldiers, or accepted vassal status. Christian nobles could retain land and authority if they served the expanding dynasty. This expansion carried Murad into conflict with Serbian and Bosnian forces at Kosovo in 1389. The battle ended with heavy losses on both sides. Prince Lazar of Serbia was killed, and Murad became the only Ottoman sultan known to have died on a battlefield. His son Bayezid emerged as ruler before the army dispersed. Bayezid's brother Yaqub was killed during the succession, apparently on the new sultan's orders. The episode exposed a principle that would shape Ottoman politics for generations. The throne did not automatically pass to the eldest son. Any capable male prince could become a rival center of loyalty. Bayezid moved quickly enough to earn the name Thunderbolt. In Europe, he tightened control over Balkan vassals and defeated a large crusading army at Nicopolis in 1396. In Anatolia, he absorbed neighboring Turkish principalities and brought their soldiers, towns, and revenues under his command. He also applied sustained pressure to Constantinople. But the displaced Anatolian rulers wanted their lands returned, and they found a powerful champion in Timur. Timur's empire stretched from Central Asia into Iran and Mesopotamia. Bayezid and Timur competed for influence over eastern Anatolia, exchanged demands, and received refugees from one another's enemies. Their confrontation was not a simple struggle between Europe and Asia. Bayezid's army included Serbian Christian troops and contingents from recently conquered Muslim principalities. Timur's allies included former rulers who understood that an Ottoman defeat might restore their positions. At Ankara, exhaustion, divided loyalties, and Timur's tactical advantage worked against Bayezid. Some Anatolian contingents abandoned him for their former lords. Serbian troops continued to resist, but they could not reverse the battle. Bayezid died in captivity the following year. Later stories describe Timur displaying him in an iron cage, but surviving evidence does not establish that famous humiliation as fact. The confirmed result was serious enough. No undisputed sultan remained, and no rule required Bayezid's sons to accept one brother as sovereign. Suleiman established himself in the European provinces. Isa competed for Bursa. Mehmed held territory around Amasya in northern Anatolia, while Musa eventually built his own power in Europe. Each brother recruited commanders, collected revenue, negotiated with neighboring rulers, and presented himself as the legitimate heir. Outside powers changed sides because division allowed them to recover territory or restrain whichever prince seemed strongest. The struggle became a shifting war rather than a clean contest between two armies. Mehmed defeated Isa, then used Musa to weaken Suleiman. Musa defeated and killed Suleiman, but soon became Mehmed's enemy. In July of 1413, Mehmed, supported by Byzantine and Serbian forces, defeated Musa near Sofia. After approximately 11 years of civil war, he stood as Mehmed I, ruler of a reunited Ottoman state. The dynasty endured because its institutions had fractured without disappearing. Provincial commanders, judges, tax networks, frontier families, and vassals continued to function under competing princes. The brothers damaged the state, but they also kept Ottoman authority alive in separate regions. None of their neighbors produced another family able to command comparable loyalty across Anatolia and the Balkans. The name of Osman remained a political resource even when his descendants were killing one another. Mehmed I spent the rest of his reign restoring fortresses, relationships, and revenue. When Murad II succeeded him in 1421, rival princes again tested the throne. Murad defeated an uncle named Mustafa, and then a rebellion centered on his younger brother. After abdicating in favor of his young son Mehmed in 1444, he returned to defeat a crusading army at Varna. A Janissary revolt recalled him again in 1446, and his victory at Kosovo 2 years later restored Ottoman military authority in the Balkans. By Murad's death in 1451, the dynasty had recovered from capture, partition, civil war, and repeated rebellion. Its survival rested on military households and governing networks that remained attached to the House of Osman even when they disagreed over which prince should rule. But recovery carried a warning. As long as every prince could raise an army, the family that gave the empire continuity could also tear it apart. Murad's successor would answer that danger with a stronger capital, deeper centralization, and a far more ruthless understanding of dynastic survival. In 1517, victory over the Mamluk Sultanate brought Cairo, Syria, and the holy cities of the Hejaz into the Ottoman order. The House of Osman now ruled territories in Europe, Asia, and Africa. Yet conquest alone could not hold such different lands together. Its deeper achievement was a flexible system that commanded armies while preserving provincial institutions Istanbul could not easily replace. This expansion began with a struggle inside the dynasty. Selim I secured the throne in 1512 after forcing his father, Bayezid II, to abdicate. He then eliminated rival princes who could challenge his rule. Selim then turned toward Shah Ismail and the Safavid Empire. Their conflict concerned territory and frontier loyalties, but it also had a religious dimension. The Ottoman court defended Sunni authority, while the Safavids promoted Shiite rule and attracted supporters within Ottoman lands. At Chaldiran in 1514, Ottoman firearms and artillery helped defeat the Safavid army. Selim did not destroy the Safavid state, and their rivalry continued. He next attacked the Mamluk Sultanate. Victories at Marj-e-Dabik in 1516 and outside Cairo in 1517 destroyed Mamluk sovereignty in Syria and Egypt. The Sharif of Mecca acknowledged Ottoman authority, placing the holy cities under Ottoman protection. Conquest strengthened Selim's Sunni prestige. but contemporary evidence does not confirm the later story of a formal ceremony transferring the caliphate to him. Suleiman inherited this transformed empire in 1520 and immediately extended it. Belgrade fell in 1521, opening the route into Central Europe. Rhodes surrendered in 1522, removing a naval stronghold near Anatolia. At Mohacs in 1526, Ottoman forces destroyed the Hungarian royal army, and King Louis II died during the retreat. The victory shattered the kingdom but did not settle its future. Ottoman and Habsburg rulers competed for Hungarian fortresses and revenue for decades. The failed siege of Vienna in 1529 revealed the limits of Ottoman reach. Distance, supply problems, severe weather, strong fortifications, and Habsburg resistance prevented conquest. Central Hungary did not become an Ottoman province until 1541, while other lands remained under Habsburg or local rule. In the east, Suleiman captured Baghdad in 1534. Repeated campaigns, however, failed to eliminate the Safavids. The Peace of Amasya in 1555 stabilized a frontier neither empire had been able to erase. Ottoman power also moved by sea. Hayreddin Barbarossa, a Mediterranean corsair commander, became Suleiman's Grand Admiral. His victory at Preveza in 1538 strengthened Ottoman influence across the eastern Mediterranean. Algiers and other North African centers joined an imperial network supported by warships, garrisons, corsair fleets, and local elites. This was not uniform control. Istanbul governed some ports closely, influenced others through commanders, and never conquered Morocco. Ottoman Africa was a chain of strategic relationships as much as a continuous territory. The same flexibility shaped government on land. The Sultans stood at the center, but administration depended on the Imperial Council, Grand Vizier, provincial governors, financial officials, and judges. Islamic law operated beside regulations issued under sultanic authority. These addressed taxation, administration, landholding, and criminal matters. Registers recorded households, farmland, and taxable resources. Under the Timar system, cavalrymen collected assigned revenues in return for military service. They did not simply own those lands as private hereditary estates. This arrangement connected provincial income to the army while preserving the Sultan's authority. No single model governed every province. Much of Anatolia and the Balkans was integrated through governors, judges, registers, and Timar assignments. Egypt retained Mamluk and local fiscal practices beneath an Ottoman governor and garrison. In the Hejaz, the Sharif of Mecca exercised local authority while the dynasty protected pilgrimage routes, sent subsidies, and claimed guardianship of the holy places. North African provinces relied heavily on naval commanders and local military households. Christian and Jewish communities managed some religious and communal affairs through their own leaders, but this limited autonomy did not make subjects equal. Difference was managed and taxed rather than abolished. Suleiman's government also turned revenue into visible legitimacy. The architect Mimar Sinan designed mosques, bridges, schools, hospitals, baths, and waterworks. In Istanbul, the Süleymaniye complex joined a monumental mosque to institutions supported by a charitable endowment. Its kitchens fed people, presenting conquest as public benefit. Architecture could not erase coercion or inequality, but it made dynastic power present in daily urban life. By the end of Suleiman's reign, the House of Osman commanded a vast and sophisticated state. Its durability rested not on uniform rule, but on a central army, adaptable law, trained officials, religious institutions, local elites, and graded autonomy. That system explains how one family ruled 3 continents. It did not determine who within that family should rule next. Suleiman ordered the execution of his son Mustafa in 1553. His son Bayezid was defeated in a succession struggle and executed with his sons in 1561. When Suleiman died during the siege of Sigetvar in 1566, Selim was his only surviving son. Immediate civil war had been prevented, but at a terrible cost. The next era would test whether an empire built under commanding sultans could function when power increasingly passed through grand viziers, palace households, and rival factions around the throne. In 1595, Mehmed III inherited the Ottoman throne and ordered 19 younger brothers executed. None commanded a rebel army. Their existence alone made them possible sultans. Their deaths expressed the harsh logic of Ottoman succession. One prince would preserve the state by removing every male relative who might divide it. This could prevent civil war, but it also depleted the men capable of continuing the House of Osman. The danger grew as the imperial family withdrew from provincial government. Earlier princes had been sent with their mothers to administer districts, build households, and gain experience before competing for the throne. By the late 16th century, that practice was disappearing. Suleiman's consort, Hurrem Sultan, had already marked a change by remaining at the imperial center, cultivating patronage, and conducting political correspondence. She did not rule the empire, but her position helped make the palace the permanent political home of the sultan's consort and children. Later royal women developed influence through this structure. Nurbanu Sultan became valid a sultan when her son Murad III took the throne. The title meant mother of the reigning sultan and brought income, staff, rank, and privileged access. Safia Sultan held the position under Mehmed III. Both used charitable foundations, correspondence, appointments, and patronage networks to advance dynastic interests. Their authority was real, but women did not secretly control every decision. Power was contested among the sultan, his mother, eunuchs, viziers, judges, military officers, and palace households. Mehmed's destruction of 19 possible heirs showed why the system could not continue indefinitely. When Ahmed I became sultan in 1603, he did not kill his younger brother Mustafa. Ahmed was young and initially had no son, so Mustafa provided insurance against the dynasty's extinction. Even after Ahmed produced male heirs, Mustafa remained alive. One surviving brother created a choice the family had previously tried to eliminate. When Ahmed died in 1617, the throne did not pass to one of his sons. Courtiers and senior officials raised Mustafa, the oldest surviving man of the dynasty, instead. His accession broke the recent pattern of succession from father to son and opened the way toward rule by the eldest eligible male. This principle, later known as agnatic seniority, did not become settled law in one moment. Mustafa was deposed, restored after another crisis, and deposed again. Nevertheless, the family had discovered that a brother could inherit without first killing the previous sultan's sons. The new arrangement required another way to control princes. Instead of governing provinces, potential heirs lived under surveillance in secluded palace apartments associated with the term cafés, meaning cage. Confinement protected princes from immediate execution and prevented them from building provincial armies. It also isolated future rulers from administration, warfare, and society beyond the palace. Some waited for decades without knowing whether their future held a throne or death. The system preserved their lives, but fear remained its organizing principle. It did not end violent succession. Osman II, Ahmed's son, became sultan in 1618. After conflict with the Janissaries and plans that threatened established military interests, he was deposed and killed in 1622. The murder of a reigning sultan demonstrated that armed institutions could decide who remained on the throne. Mustafa briefly returned, followed by Osman's brothers Murad IV and Ibrahim. Murad eventually ruled with personal force, but Ibrahim had spent years confined as the dynasty's last surviving adult male. He became sultan in 1640, was deposed in 1648, and was soon executed. Ibrahim's 6-year-old son, Mehmed IV, inherited the throne. His grandmother, Kosem Sultan, had exercised authority as Valide Sultan during Murad's youth and remained influential under Ibrahim. With a child ruling, she retained exceptional power. Mehmed's mother, Turhan Sultan, possessed her own claim to the office and resources of the Queen Mother. In 1651, men aligned with Turhan killed Kosem during a struggle between their palace factions. Preserving male princes had not removed lethal competition. It had shifted that competition into the households surrounding them. Turhan emerged as a powerful Valid sultan, but she did not govern alone. Military unrest, financial strain, war with Venice, and rapid changes of ministers weakened the government. In 1656, Köprülü Mehmed Pasha accepted appointment as Grand Vizier with unusually broad authority. Supported by Turhan and the young sultan, He imposed discipline, defeated opponents, and restored administrative direction through often severe methods. His son Fazıl Ahmed Pasha succeeded him, turning a vizierial household into a durable center of government. By delegating authority, the dynasty proved that the empire could function without a sultan directing every campaign or council. By adopting seniority and confining rather than routinely killing princes, it created a reserve of heirs. The House of Osman survived because preservation finally became more important than competition among brothers. Yet future sultans could reach the throne after years of isolation, while power passed among mothers, ministers, soldiers, and palace factions. The family had reduced its risk of extinction, but authority was more dispersed as European warfare and imperial finance changed. In 1683, the campaign against Vienna would reveal that saving the dynasty and defending the empire were no longer the same problem. In 1699, the Treaty of Karlowitz forced the Ottoman government to surrender extensive territories. Most of Hungary and Transylvania passed to the Habsburgs, Podolia returned to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and Venice received the Morea. The settlement confirmed a change begun outside Vienna 16 years earlier. The empire could still fight and recover land, but it could no longer assume that war would end on terms chosen in Istanbul. The failed siege of Vienna in 1683 had opened a wider conflict with the Holy League. Repeated defeats and the cost of mobilizing men, artillery, animals, and provisions strained the treasury. Karlowitz did not begin an uninterrupted collapse. It compelled the court to treat negotiation, borders, diplomacy, and alliances as instruments of survival. The empire was becoming part of a changing balance of power rather than the force setting its rhythm alone. Military outcomes remained uneven. Ottoman forces recovered Belgrade from the Habsburgs in 1739, proving that losses were not always final. Yet wars against Russia became increasingly dangerous. The Treaty of Küçük-Kaynarca in 1774 ended a severe defeat and expanded Russian influence around the Black Sea. Russia annexed Crimea in 1783, ending Ottoman authority over a Muslim territory. Such reverses prompted experiments in finance, intelligence, diplomacy, and military organization rather than paralysis. War required cash on a scale the old provincial cavalry system could not supply. The government expanded tax farming, granting individuals rights to collect specified revenues in exchange for payments to the treasury. From the late 17th century, some contracts lasted for life. This provided money and credit but strengthened brokers with wealth and connections. Provincial notables known as ayan recruited soldiers, collected taxes, supplied armies, and negotiated with Istanbul. They could resist orders, yet they performed tasks the government could not accomplish without them. Decentralization became both a danger and a working partnership. Ahmed III's reign demonstrated the same mixture of adaptation and vulnerability. After the Treaty of Passarowitz in 1718, his government cultivated diplomacy, urban rebuilding, courtly patronage, and closer observation of European practices. The period later called the Tulip Era was more than a festival of elite luxury, although consumption and display exposed the court to criticism. In 1730, an uprising associated with Patrona Halil overthrew the Grand Vizier and forced Ahmed to abdicate. Reform could proceed only while soldiers, religious authorities, artisans, and urban groups believed their interests were protected. Selim III confronted that problem after taking the throne in 1789. During the 1790s, he created the New Order, including trained infantry, military schools, diplomatic missions, and a separate treasury. European methods were studied because wars had exposed weaknesses, not because the court wished to abandon Ottoman society. Resistance was more complicated than hatred of the West. Reform threatened janissary pay, commercial networks, tax privileges, religious patronage, and the influence of groups connected to the old military order. A janissary-led revolt deposed Selim in 1807. He was killed the following year during a struggle for the throne. Mahmud II survived that crisis and became sultan in 1808. He initially lacked the strength to rule without provincial power holders. Representatives of the court and notables signed an agreement recognizing mutual obligations. It was not a lasting constitution, but it revealed the capital's dependence on provincial military and financial support. Mahmud spent years rebuilding central authority, eliminating some rivals, absorbing others, and creating loyal forces. His most formidable provincial challenger, Mehmed Ali of Egypt, proved far more difficult to control. The decisive confrontation inside the capital came in 1826. Mahmud introduced another body of drilled troops. When the Janissaries rebelled, forces loyal to the Sultan bombarded their barracks and crushed the uprising. The government abolished the corps, executed or exiled many members, seized property, and suppressed connected institutions. Official language celebrated the event as the auspicious incident. The dynasty had destroyed an organization that had protected Ottoman rulers, removed them, and shaped urban life for centuries. Mahmud used the opening to construct a different state. A new army expanded central recruitment and training. Government offices became ministries, while councils and salaried officials assumed responsibilities once embedded in palace households. Clothing regulations placed officials in standardized dress. Population counts gathered information about taxable and recruitable males rather than conducting a complete modern census. An official newspaper, postal arrangements, and new reporting channels increased the government's ability to communicate and observe. These measures were incomplete and coercive, but they gave Istanbul tools unavailable to earlier sultans. Ottoman survival after Vienna was not mere inertia. The government reorganized revenue, bargained with provincial elites, adopted balance of power diplomacy, and destroyed one of its foundational military institutions. Research into Ottoman finance reveals repeated adaptation across these centuries, not an unbroken descent. Yet centralization did not guarantee victory. In 1839, while Mahmud lay dying, the Egyptian army of Mehmed Ali defeated Ottoman forces at Nizip. His young successor inherited new ministries and a new army, but also a state whose own governor threatened its survival. Mahmud had saved the throne by breaking the army that once defended it. The dynasty now had to promise that a reorganized government would protect all its subjects. On November 3, 1839, the Gulhan Edict publicly promised security for the lives, honor, and property of the Sultan's subjects. Issued in the name of Abdulmesid I, it also called for regular taxation, orderly conscription, and lawful trials. The declaration answered an immediate crisis, but it made a broader claim. The House of Osman could survive by replacing personal and uneven government with rules that bound officials as well as the governed. The reform period known as the Tanzimat reorganized administration across the empire. The Edict of 1839 did not instantly create equal citizenship, and officials often violated its promises. A second decree in 1856 stated more explicitly that Muslim and non-Muslim subjects should receive equal legal protection and access to public service. European governments pressed for such guarantees, especially after the Crimean War, but Ottoman reformers also believed that a common political identity could hold the empire together. Religious hierarchy, local resistance, and administrative weakness limited the results. Reform entered daily life through institutions. New provincial councils and regulations extended central supervision. Secular courts developed beside Islamic and communal courts, while commercial and criminal codes borrowed from European models. State schools trained officers, doctors, teachers, and administrators. Telegraph lines allowed orders and reports to cross distances that once required weeks. Conscription and more direct taxation expanded the government's demands upon households. The modernizing state promised protection, but it also counted, taxed, educated, and recruited its population more intensively. These measures were expensive. During the Crimean War against Russia, the Ottoman government joined Britain and France and obtained its first foreign loan in 1854. Borrowing continued after the war, financing infrastructure, military spending, and budget deficits under increasingly unfavorable conditions. In 1875, the government defaulted on much of its debt. The Ottoman Public Debt Administration later gave foreign creditors control over designated revenues. Modernization strengthened the state, but dependence on European finance narrowed its freedom. The financial crisis intensified demands for political restraint. Intellectuals known as the Young Ottomans argued during the 1860s and 70s that representative government could be reconciled with Islamic and Ottoman principles. On December 23, 1876, the empire promulgated its first constitution. Midhat Pasha played a central role in its creation. The document established a parliament and defined Ottoman subjects within a common political order, but it also preserved extensive powers for the Sultan. Abdülhamid II had accepted the constitution after becoming Sultan during a year of coups and crisis. War with Russia began in 1877 and ended in a disastrous Ottoman defeat. The resulting settlements recognized or enlarged independent Balkan states and reduced Ottoman territory. In 1878, Abdülhamid suspended parliament and ruled without it for the next 3 decades. The constitution remained a political promise that opponents could demand, even when its institutions no longer met. The loss of Balkan provinces did not simply produce administrative collapse. Abdülhamid strengthened central authority across many remaining territories. Railways connected ports, provincial centers, and strategic frontiers. The telegraph carried commands, intelligence, and petitions. Schools expanded, producing a larger body of officers and civil servants. Newspapers created wider political audiences. The palace monitored officials and opponents through surveillance, informants, and censorship. At the same time, Abdülhamid emphasized his position as caliph and protector of Muslims, using religious solidarity to reinforce dynastic loyalty within the empire and beyond it. Centralization also produced organized violence. From 1894 through 1896, massacres devastated Armenian communities across Anatolia and Istanbul. Armenian political organizations had demanded reforms, and some employed revolutionary methods, but those facts do not reduce the killings to spontaneous ethnic conflict. Ottoman soldiers, police, state-backed Hamidiye cavalry units, officials, and local participants were directly involved. The precise death toll remains disputed, yet the evidence establishes responsibility reaching into state institutions. The government that promised protection had helped direct or enable mass violence against its own subjects. Repression could not contain the political world created by reform. Schools taught new generations to read law, history, science, and political argument. Newspapers circulated ideas despite censorship. Exiles used presses and international networks beyond the palace's reach. The Young Turks became a broad opposition movement rather than a single unified party. Within it, the Committee of Union and Progress grew from a secret organization founded by students in 1889 into a network among officers, officials, and exiles. Some members demanded constitutional Ottoman unity. Others increasingly embraced competing visions of centralization and nationalism. By 1908, officers associated with the committee in Macedonia feared foreign intervention, territorial partition, and punishment by the palace. They used military units, telegraph communications, and clandestine organization to force Abdülhamid to restore the constitution. The dynasty's reforms had succeeded in creating a more connected state capable of raising armies, collecting revenue, training officials, and transmitting orders. They had also created a political class that claimed sovereignty should rest on law, parliament, or the nation rather than the will of one ruler. The House of Osman had modernized to defend its throne. The people trained by that state now used its own army, schools, communications, and political organizations to limit dynastic power. In July 1908, officers connected to the Committee of Union and Progress rebelled in Macedonia and forced Abdülhamid II to restore the constitution and reopen parliament after 3 decades. Crowds celebrated across the empire. Muslims, Christians, and Jews appeared together beneath slogans of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The moment revived the promise of a common Ottoman citizenship, but it did not settle whether sovereignty belonged to the Sultan, parliament, the army, or the empire's national communities. The constitutional order faced competing expectations. Reformers wanted accountable government, minorities demanded security and representation, and military officers feared foreign intervention and territorial disintegration. In April 1909, a revolt in Constantinople challenged the new political order. An army assembled in Macedonia suppressed it. Parliament then deposed Abdülhamid, holding him responsible for the crisis. Although the precise extent of his involvement remains disputed, His brother became Mehmed V, a sultan whose ceremonial and religious importance survived, but whose political authority was sharply limited. Constitutional government did not stop imperial losses. Italy invaded Ottoman Libya in 1911. The empire could send officers and supplies with difficulty because Italy controlled the sea and neighboring Egypt was under British occupation. The war ended in 1912 with Ottoman withdrawal from Libya, while Italy retained islands it had occupied in the Aegean. A province connected to the dynasty since the 16th century had been lost to a European colonial power. Before that conflict fully ended, Bulgaria, Serbia, Greece, and Montenegro attacked. During the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913, Ottoman armies suffered catastrophic defeats. The empire lost nearly all its remaining European territory beyond eastern Thrace. Muslim civilians experienced killing, expulsion, and flight, while refugees entered the diminished Ottoman lands. Towns that had belonged to the empire for centuries disappeared from its administration within months. The losses weakened faith in parliamentary politics and strengthened officers who claimed national survival required centralized command. In January 1913, members of the Committee of Union and Progress seized the government in an armed coup. After further violence and consolidation, Talat Pasha, Enver Pasha, and Cemal Pasha became the most prominent figures within a broader unionist ruling network. Mehmed V remained sultan, but ministers, party leaders, and officers controlled the decisions of state. The House of Osman still supplied legitimacy. It no longer directed the empire as its ancestors had. When World War I began in 1914, Ottoman leaders faced isolation, Russian pressure, financial weakness, and recent territorial humiliation. A secret alliance connected the empire to Germany, while German warships entered Ottoman service. In October, an Ottoman fleet under German command attacked Russian ports in the Black Sea, bringing declarations of war. Enver and other unionist leaders drove the decision, while ministers disagreed, and the Sultan did not determine the outcome. Mehmed later proclaimed a religious call to war, giving dynastic and caliphal authority to a strategy devised elsewhere. The empire fought across an enormous front. Ottoman forces stopped the Allied attempt to seize the Dardanelles at Gallipoli, a defensive victory. In the Caucasus, the campaign at Sarikamish ended in disaster. Ottoman troops defeated a British force at Kut in Mesopotamia, but Britain later captured Baghdad. British armies advanced through Palestine and took Jerusalem. The Arab Revolt began in 1916 under Sharif Hussein of Mecca, with British support challenging Ottoman authority in the Hejaz. Yet many Arabs continued to serve in Ottoman armies, and the revolt did not represent every Arab subject. War also enabled the destruction of the Ottoman Armenians. On April 24, 1915, authorities arrested Armenian intellectuals and community leaders in Constantinople. The Unionist government then ordered mass deportations from Anatolia. Men were separated and killed. Women, children, and older people were driven toward the Syrian desert, where massacres, starvation, disease, and exposure destroyed entire communities. Officials and security forces organized deportations, while state agents and local perpetrators carried out killings. Property was registered, confiscated, transferred, or looted. These policies constituted the Armenian genocide, not an accidental consequence of battlefield disorder. The government claimed that Armenian revolutionary activity and Russian invasion created a security emergency. Some Armenians did join Russian forces or resist Ottoman authorities. Those facts cannot justify or explain away a policy directed against an entire population. The central leadership of the Committee of Union and Progress used ministries, provincial administrations, gendarmes, deportation orders, and property regulations to conduct systematic persecution. The precise number of victims is debated, but the state's organizing role and the genocidal character of the campaign are established by extensive evidence. Mehmed V died in July 1918 and was succeeded by his brother, Mehmed VI. By then, Bulgaria was leaving the war, Allied armies were advancing, and the Unionist leadership could no longer preserve the military position. On October 30th, the Armistice of Mudros ended Ottoman participation in the conflict and allowed the Allies to occupy strategic locations. The dynasty had survived in form, but it could not rescue a government whose decisive policies it no longer controlled. After the defeat, the imperial government in Constantinople and a resistance movement emerging in Ankara would both claim to represent the country. For 6 centuries, challengers had usually needed an Ottoman prince to legitimize power. Mustafa Kemal and the assembly at Ankara would advance a different principle. Sovereignty belonged to no family. Allied troops occupied Constantinople after the Ottoman defeat, while the government of Mehmed VI tried to preserve the throne through negotiation. Allied forces controlled strategic points and narrowed the capital's freedom. The dynasty had survived foreign invasions before, but another government was now forming inside the empire. Its leaders did not propose replacing one Ottoman prince with another. They argued that political authority belonged to the nation. The Treaty of Sèvres, signed by representatives of the Sultan's government in August 1920, revealed the danger. The Arab provinces had already been separated. The treaty provided for Greek administration around Smyrna, recognized an Armenian state, opened a possible path toward Kurdish autonomy, and placed the Straits under international control. It divided influence among victorious powers and left the Ottoman government with limited sovereignty. It never became an effective settlement because a movement in Anatolia rejected its terms and the authority of its signers. Mustafa Kemal emerged as the central leader of that resistance. Ottoman officers, civil servants, defense groups, religious figures, and elected representatives gathered around Ankara. In April 1920, the Grand National Assembly opened there and claimed supreme authority. Constantinople still possessed the Sultan, ministries, and international recognition. Ankara increasingly possessed armed forces, territory, and a legislature. 2 governments now competed to speak for the same country. The War of Independence was not a simple conflict between a unified nation and foreign occupation. Loyalties within Anatolia were divided, and violence struck Muslim and Christian civilians. Ankara's forces fought Armenian troops in the east, French forces and their allies in the south, internal rebellions, and the Greek army in western Anatolia. The Greek advance reached the interior before being stopped at the Battle of Sakarya in 1921. In August 1922, Ankara launched an offensive that broke the Greek military position. The war ended amid fire, killings and mass displacement at Smyrna. Military victory transformed the question of legitimacy. The Allied powers invited both governments to a new peace conference. For the Assembly, accepting 2 delegations would imply that sovereignty remained divided. Ankara now possessed the victorious army, controlled most territory under negotiation, and had secured foreign agreements. The palace could offer dynastic tradition, but it could no longer command the forces determining the country's future. On November 1, 1922, the Grand National Assembly abolished the Ottoman Sultanate. The decision separated the political throne from the caliphate and declared that sovereign authority rested with the nation represented at Ankara. Mehmed VI did not abdicate. Fearing for his safety, he requested British protection. On November 17, he left Constantinople aboard the British battleship Malaya. A line of sultans that had survived Ankara, civil wars, regicide, military revolt, and foreign invasion ended not on a battlefield, but through an act of a rival legislature. The assembly retained Abdul-Majid II, a member of the House of Osman, as caliph. He possessed religious prestige but no political sovereignty. This briefly preserved part of the dynasty while confirming that the Sultanate and Caliphate were separate. The Treaty of Lausanne in 1923 replaced Sèvres and secured international recognition of the new Turkish state within revised borders. On October 29, the Assembly proclaimed the Republic of Turkey, with Ankara as its capital. The arrangement did not last. Republican leaders feared the Caliphate could become an alternative center of loyalty and opposition. On March 3, 1924, the Grand National Assembly abolished the office. Abdul-Majid was removed, and members of the Ottoman dynasty were ordered into exile. Unlike the uncertain traditions surrounding Osman's beginnings, this ending can be followed through surviving legislation and parliamentary proceedings. The dynasty continued as a family, but no longer possessed a political or religious office in Turkey. The House of Osman had endured because it separated dynastic continuity from the identity of those who governed. It absorbed outsiders into its armies and administration, allowed viziers, queen mothers, officers, and bureaucrats to exercise authority, changed succession from princely competition to seniority, and governed provinces through different arrangements. This flexibility let the throne survive weak sultans, lost wars, and institutional revolutions. The system ended when Ankara acquired every resource that once made the dynasty indispensable: an army, territory, administration, foreign recognition, and a competing principle of legitimacy. The Ottoman legacy did not disappear with the throne. Borders, provincial institutions, land laws, religious endowments, railways, courts, and administrative records shaped successor states across the Balkans, the Middle East, and North Africa. Ottoman mosques, churches, synagogues, bridges, markets, and neighborhoods still shape cities. Population expulsions and massacres left wounds central to national memory. The empire can signify inheritance, occupation, protection, loss, or violence depending on who is speaking and what evidence survives. The failure before Vienna in 1683 did not end Ottoman power, and the loss of Hungary did not produce immediate collapse. The dynasty adapted for more than 2 centuries. Its final defeat was different because no rival family was required to replace it. On November 1, 1922, a legislature claimed that sovereignty belonged to the nation rather than the House of Osman. Osman left no certain date when his frontier principality became a state. 6 centuries later, the assembly left a clear legal decision ending the throne that carried his name.